The crystal flute felt cool and fragile in my hand, a tiny, elegant lie. It was a prop in a play I was no longer sure I wanted to star in. Around me the air hummed with the low, expensive murmur of our guests, the clinking of glasses, a symphony of a celebration I had meticulously orchestrated. 5 years. 5 years since I'd stood in a sun-drenched garden, my hand in David's, and promised him forever. The memory was like a photograph I'd kept too long in my wallet, the edges softened and blurred by time and hope. I allowed myself a moment to just watch him. He was holding court by the marble fireplace, his laugh, that rich, easy sound that had once felt like coming home, rolling across the room. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his tailored suit hugging the shoulders I used to lean on. He looked every inch the successful architect, the doting husband, my husband. For a treacherous second, a ghost of the old love flickered in my chest, a warm, aching ember. Then my gaze drifted, as it always did, to the woman permanently affixed to his side. Eleanor. Her fingers, tipped in blood-red polish, were wrapped around his bicep, not in affection, but in possession. Her grip so tight the fine wool of his jacket was surely creased. My mother-in-law was a sculpture of cold elegance. Her silver blonde hair was swept into a severe chignon. Not a single strand dared to escape. Her black designer dress, a silent announcement of wealth, probably cost more than my first car. She was holding forth on some obscure point of Palladian architecture, her voice a low, cultured murmur that demanded submission. David was nodding, enraptured. He was always enraptured by her. A memory, sharp as a shard of glass, pierced the moment, our first dinner after the engagement. Eleanor had taken my left hand, her own fingers cold and surprisingly strong, like the talons of a bird. She'd examined the modest diamond solitaire, a piece David and I had chosen together after months of saving. "Charming," she'd said, the word dripping with a condescension so pure, it was almost an art form. David has such a sentimental heart. I always pictured him with the family emeralds, something with history. David had laughed it off, squeezing my shoulder. "Mom, leave her alone, it's perfect." But his eyes, those beautiful blue eyes I loved, had flickered to his mother's, seeking, and failing to find, her approval. The ember in my chest cooled a little more. The shift in the room's energy was so sudden it was like a record scratch. The music from the string quartet seemed to falter. Eleanor had disengaged from David and was moving through the crowd. Not like a guest, but like a shark cutting through water. Her expression was pinched, urgent. She wasn't mingling. She was hunting. Her eyes, the same cold Nordic blue as David's, scanned the room before landing on me with the force of a physical blow. They narrowed. She stopped a foot away, her signature perfume. Gardenia something, cloying and overwhelmingly floral, invading my space, clashing violently with the subtle notes of champagne and beeswax candles. "Amelia!" My name on her lips wasn't a greeting. It was an indictment. I forced my hostess' smile, feeling the muscles in my cheeks strain against the impending dread. "Eleanor, is everything all right?" The question tasted like ash. "No," she declared, her voice rising to a theatrical pitch that sliced through the remaining chatter. A hush fell, swift and absolute. "Everything is most certainly not all right. My diamond necklace, the heirloom piece, the one that belonged to my grandmother, it's gone." A collective performative gasp rippled through her coterie, murmurs of concern, like vultures circling. "Oh, Eleanor, darling, that's terrible," one of her sycophants cried. "When did you last see it?" "It was on my dressing table this afternoon," she said, her eyes never leaving mine. They were hard, glittering with a grief I knew was as fake as her veneer of concern. "I was going to wear it tonight, but I decided it was too much for such a casual affair." The insult was a bonus stab. "The only people who have been in my room today are the housekeeper and you." The air left my lungs in a silent whoosh. The implication didn't just hang in the silence, it suffocated it, thick and vile. I could feel the weight of 50 pairs of eyes, a jury already convinced. My face burned. "Me? Eleanor, I was only there to drop off your anniversary gift, the Lalique vase you admired. I was in your room for 30 seconds. Tops." "Long enough," she said, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper designed to carry. "You've always been jealous of that necklace. I've seen the way you look at it. You've never appreciated the fine things our family represents. You've never been enough for what we have." The cruelty was so precise, so calculated, it stole the breath from my lungs a second time. It wasn't just an accusation of theft, it was an annihilation of my entire being in their world. Then David was there, his face a mask of bewildered concern. "Mom, what's all this? What's going on?" "David!" Eleanor cried, her hand fluttering to her chest in a perfect pantomime of distress. "My necklace, the Cartier, it's been stolen, and Amelia, she was the last one in my room." David's head swiveled toward me. I watched it happen in horrifying slow motion. The confusion on his face curdled, shifting through concern for her to dawning suspicion, and finally settling into something uglier, something primal I'd seen glimpses of but had always, foolishly, excused. A deep-seated rage, always on a hair trigger, always activated by his mother's manufactured distress. "Amelia?" he said, his voice low and dangerously calm. "What is she talking about?" "Nothing, David. I didn't take anything." My voice trembled, betraying a panic that made me seem guilty even to my own ears. "She's lying. Why would I do that?" "Why, indeed?" Eleanor sneered, emboldened by his attention. "Perhaps to pawn it. Your little art consultancy isn't doing so well, is it? All those passion projects. Or perhaps just to have a piece of us, since you'll never truly be one of us." "That's enough!" I snapped, my own anger, hot and sharp, finally breaking through the shock. "How dare you!" David stepped between us, but his body was angled toward me, a shield for her. He loomed over me, his handsome face twisting into a snarl that was utterly foreign. "Just give it back, Amelia," he growled, his voice shaking with a fury that was entirely for my benefit. "Give it back to her right now, apologize for this scene, and we can try to forget this unfortunate misunderstanding." The world tilted on its axis. This was my husband, the man who had vowed to cherish me. He hadn't asked a single question. He hadn't looked for a shred of evidence. He was convicting me on the spot based on her word alone. The ember of love turned to ice. "David, listen to me," I pleaded, tears of sheer frustration and betrayal welling in my eyes, blurring his furious face. "I didn't take her necklace. I would never. You have to believe me." His mother placed a trembling, perfectly manicured hand on his arm. "See how she lies to your face, David? So brazen, after all we've done for her, after we welcomed her into our home." That was all it took. The final push. His eyes, the eyes I'd once gotten lost in, went blank with a pure, unadulterated rage. The switch had been flipped. "I said give it back!" He roared, the sound animalistic, echoing in the pristine, stunned silence of the room. He moved faster than I could react, his hand snapping out to grab my upper arm. His fingers dug into my flesh like iron vices, the pain so sharp and shocking a cry was torn from my lips. "Let go of me! You're hurting me! Or we're done!" he shouted, shaking me once, hard. My teeth rattled. "Do you hear me? Done!" The crystal flute slipped from my numb fingers and exploded on the polished floor, a tiny symphony of shattering glass and wasted champagne. Blind, reflexive terror took over. I tried to wrench myself free. In response, he shoved me. Hard. It wasn't a dramatic, sweeping push. It was a brutal, dismissive thrust of the heel of his hand against my sternum, a gesture of utter contempt. My stiletto caught on the intricate edge of the Persian rug, a rug I'd spent months finding. There was no grace, no slow motion. One moment I was standing, grappling with the man I loved, and the next the world was a nauseating whirl of crystal chandelier lights and a gallery of horrified open-mouthed faces. Then my back and the back of my head connected with the unyielding hardwood floor with a sickening, resonant thud. The impact knocked the wind out of me. A sharp, searing pain, white-hot and terrifying, shot up my spine. I lay there gasping like a fish out of water, utterly humiliated. The cold of the floor seeped through my silk dress, a stark, shocking reality against the heat of my shame. The room was dead silent except for my ragged, desperate breaths. I looked up, my vision swimming. David was standing over me, his chest heaving, his face still a mask of fury. And beside him, clinging to his arm, was Eleanor. She looked down at me, and in her eyes there was no victory. There was no emotion at all, just a complete and utter void, an absence of humanity. I was less than nothing to her. I was a problem that had been dealt with, and in that moment, lying on the floor my own salary had helped pay for, surrounded by the ruins of a marriage I'd fought so desperately to save, something in me shattered. But it wasn't a break into pieces. It was a break open. The first clear, diamond-sharp thought cut through the pain and the humiliation, so lucid it was like a voice from outside myself. What kind of husband assaults his wife over a necklace because his mother is a lunatic? The clarity that followed was as cold and hard as the floor beneath me. Time became elastic. I don't know how long I lay there on that cold, hard floor, seconds that stretched into an eternity of shame. The weight of the stairs felt physical, 100 tiny pinpricks. Then movement. Not from David's side of the room, but from mine. Sarah, my college roommate, her face pale with a horror that mirrored my own, broke from the crowd, followed by her partner, Mark. "Amelia, my God," she whispered, her voice cracking as she knelt beside me, her hand hovering over me as if she was afraid to touch me and break me further. "Are you okay? Can you move?" I couldn't speak. My throat was sealed shut by a plug of humiliation and pain. I managed a jerky nod, then winced as the movement sent a fresh, electric spike of agony from my neck down my arm. I scanned the room frantically, looking for David. He and Eleanor were gone, vanished. They had simply left me there, broken on the floor, and walked out. The party was over in the most final way possible. Guests were already making hushed, hurried exits, their faces averted, their embarrassment for me a more potent force than any outrage on my behalf. Sarah and Mark helped me to my feet. My legs were rubber. Every step was a fresh jolt of pain. They half carried me to the master bedroom, the scene of intimacy that now felt like a grotesque lie. "You need ice, and you need to go to the hospital, Amelia. That was a hell of a fall," Sarah said, her voice firm, cutting through the fog of shock. She was already wrapping a makeshift ice pack in a towel. "I'm fine," I mumbled automatically, the ingrained response of a woman trained to minimize her own pain, to make herself smaller to preserve the fragile ego of the man who had caused it. But I wasn't fine. My head throbbed in time with my heartbeat. My back was a screaming chorus of protest. "You are not fine," Sarah insisted, her eyes blazing with a protective fury I felt too numb to muster for myself. "He pushed you, Amelia. He assaulted you in front of 50 people. This is not okay. This is a crime." The word crime landed like a sledgehammer. It was too big, too real, too legal. It was a word for strangers, for headlines, not for my 5th wedding anniversary. But it was the right word. It was the only word. "I need to be alone, Sarah. Thank you, but please, I just need to think." She hesitated, her face etched with a worry so deep it looked like pain, but finally she nodded. Okay, we'll be right outside. You call me. The second you need anything, promise me." I promised. When the door clicked shut, the silence of the room descended. It was a thick, mocking silence. The large bed, perfectly made, seemed to accuse me. The remnants of the party, the distant sound of the cleaning crew Sarah had mustered, the faint smell of perfume and wine, were like artifacts from a civilization that had just collapsed. I didn't cry. The tears were frozen somewhere deep inside, a solid block of ice in my gut. Instead, a cold, methodical fury began to thaw it, drop by burning drop. I replayed the scene, frame by frame. Eleanor's calculated performance, the timing, the specific venomous barbs, David's instant, violent belief, his immediate escalation to physical force, the sheer, brutal orchestration of it. This wasn't about a necklace, this was a coup. A final, brutal solution to what Eleanor had always called the Amelia problem. She had never thought I was good enough for her perfect son. I was from a different world. A world of state schools and earnest effort, not legacy admissions and old money. She'd spent 5 years planting seeds of doubt, criticizing my career, a charming little hobby, my family, so salt of the earth, my taste, bold choice. She'd whittled away at my confidence with the precision of a master sculptor, and David had handed her the knives time and again. He'd always chosen her. In 1,000 small, soul-eroding ways, he'd always chosen her. The vacation plans she'd spontaneously ruined by developing a mysterious illness. The birthdays of mine he'd forgotten because she'd needed him to attend some trivial charity gala. I had made excuses for him. He's just a mama's boy. She's difficult. He doesn't know how to set boundaries. He doesn't mean to, but he did mean to. He had chosen her tonight in the most violent, public, and unequivocal way possible. He had meant to hurt me. He had meant to silence me. He had meant to put me in my place. The pain in my back intensified, a persistent, angry pulse that refused to be ignored. Sarah was right. This wasn't just humiliation. This was an injury. Gritting my teeth against the protest in my muscles, I stood up. I walked to the massive walk-in closet, my steps echoing in the emptiness of the room. I ignored the beautiful, expensive dresses and suits, the shelves of designer handbags, the trappings of a life I'd been allowed to inhabit but never truly own. My eyes went to the back. I pulled out a simple, worn pair of jeans, a soft cashmere sweater I'd bought for myself, and my trustworthy trainers. I changed slowly, painfully, each movement a reminder of what he had done. Then I went into the bathroom and flipped on the blindingly bright lights. I looked in the mirror. The woman who stared back was a stranger. Her eyes were wide, shocked but dry. There was a faint red abrasion on her cheekbone from its impact with the floor, and on her upper arm the perfect bruising outline of 4 fingers and a thumb was already blooming in violent, unmistakable shades of plum and indigo. A tattoo of betrayal. My hands were steady as I took my phone from the counter. I turned on the flash and took a picture. The clinical white light illuminated every detail, every cruel ridge and burgeoning color. It was evidence. It was proof that I was not crazy. This had happened. I grabbed my purse, my car keys, and my phone. I didn't look back at the bedroom, the vase of now drooping peonies, the beautiful gilded cage. I walked out of the house and into the cool night air, and I did not look back. The emergency room was a universe of bright fluorescent light and hushed, sterile efficiency. The hum of machines and the low murmur of the night staff were a bizarre comfort. This was real. This pain was real. The blood pressure cuff tightening on my arm was real. The throbbing in my head was real. What had happened was not a bad dream. It was a fact that was now being documented. The physician, Dr. Evans, was a woman around my age with kind, tired eyes that had seen too much. She examined me with a gentle, professional touch. "You've got a significant contusion here," she said, her fingers lightly probing the bracelet of bruises on my arm. Her touch was clinical, but her voice was soft. "And you're holding your neck very rigidly. You're showing signs of whiplash from the fall. We should get some x-rays to rule out any fractures or soft tissue damage." I just nodded, my ability to form words seemingly broken. When she finished the exam, she sat on the rolling stool and looked at me, really looked at me. "How did this happen?" she asked, her tone neutral but her eyes offering a safe harbor. And the story tumbled out of me, not in a hysterical rush, but in a flat, emotionless monotone that was more frightening than any tears could have been. I told her about the anniversary party, the public accusation, the vile insinuations, my husband's instant belief, the grab, the shake, the shove, the fall. When I said the words, "my husband," her expression didn't change, but her eyes grew harder, more focused. She didn't look surprised. "I'm going to have a patient advocate come speak with you," she said calmly, writing something on my chart. "And I need to ask, would you like to file a police report? We can help you with that here. We have resources. There are protocols for this." A police report. The words should have felt like a betrayal of my vows, a nuclear option. But David's face, twisted in that snarl, was seared into my memory. His mother's cold, triumphant stare. They had left me no choice. They had taken away the option of grace, of working it out, of couples therapy. They had chosen violence and public annihilation. The clarity returned, colder and sharper than before. It was no longer just a feeling. It was a mandate. "Yes," I heard myself say. My voice didn't sound like my own. It was stronger, clearer. It was the voice of the woman in the photograph, the one who believed in happy endings. "Yes, I would like to file a report." The process was methodical, almost soothing in its routine. The advocate, a woman named Maria with a calm, steady presence, brought me water and explained everything. The police officer, Officer Briggs, was neutral and thorough. I showed him the picture on my phone. He didn't flinch. He nodded, his face grim, and documented the bruises with a digital camera, the flash stark and unforgiving in the clinical room. He took my statement, writing down every detail I could remember. Each word I spoke, each sentence I dictated felt like I was chiseling myself out of the marble tomb of my marriage. I was no longer Amelia, the victimized wife. I was Amelia, the witness, the plaintiff. It was nearly dawn when I finally left the hospital, a prescription for painkillers in my hand, and a case number scribbled on a card in my purse. The sky was lightening to a soft, bruised gray and lavender. I drove to Sarah's apartment on autopilot. She was waiting by the door, her own eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep and worry. She didn't ask any questions. She just wordlessly let me in, put me in her guest bed, drew the blackout curtains, and left me alone. As I finally let the exhaustion and the pills pull me under, the last thought I had was not of loss, but of a strange, nascent power, fragile but undeniable. They thought they could break me. They only showed me the door. For 3 days, I existed in a bubble of numbness and pain. My body was a map of my betrayal, the deep, aching purple of the bruises on my arm fading to a sickly yellow-green, the stiffness in my neck a constant, grinding reminder. My spirit felt blank. Sarah's small, cozy apartment became my bunker, my sanctuary from a world that had suddenly turned vicious. I turned off my phone, severing the digital umbilical cord to my old life. I didn't check the news. I didn't log into social media. I knew the gossip would be raging, the story twisting through our social circle with Eleanor, the master puppeteer, undoubtedly at the center, painting me as the unhinged, thieving, hysterical woman who had attacked her poor son. I didn't care. Their world, with its coded insults and brittle smiles, felt like a distant, toxic planet I had narrowly escaped. I focused on the practical, the things I could control. I called a lawyer, a woman named Lorraine Evans recommended by a discreet friend. Her voice on the phone was sharp, clear, and blessedly free of pity. I told her the story, my voice still that frightening monotone. She listened without interruption. "Okay," she said when I finished. "First, the hospital documentation is excellent. That's your foundation. We'll file for a restraining order based on the assault first thing tomorrow. Then we'll file for dissolution. We'll go for the jugular. Irreconcilable differences and spousal abuse. He's going to pay for that little performance, Amelia, in every way possible." The word dissolution was perfect. It wasn't a divorce. It was the termination of a faulty contract, the nullification of a bad deal. Lorraine's fierce, unhesitating belief in my story was a lifeline. On the afternoon of the third day, the numbness began to recede, burned away by a slow, simmering anger. It was a clean anger, not a hot rage. It was the anger of clarity. I was sitting at Sarah's kitchen table, staring into a cup of tea I had no intention of drinking, when my phone vibrated. I'd finally turned it on to deal with essential emails, bracing for the onslaught. The screen lit up with a name I had both dreaded and, a pathetic part of me admitted, hoped to see. David. The sight of his name on the caller ID sent a jolt through my system. A sickening cocktail of old habit, residual fear, and a white-hot rage so pure it momentarily stole my breath. My finger hovered over the screen. The old Amelia, the pleaser, the excuser, wanted to answer, to hear his voice, to maybe hear the apology that would make this nightmare stop. The new Amelia, the one with the bruised arm and the case number, let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text popped up, the notification loud in the quiet kitchen. "David, Amelia, please, we need to talk. It's important." I actually sneered, a harsh, unfamiliar sound. We needed to talk? He needed something. That was the only time David ever needed to talk. When he needed to be reassured, comforted, or extracted from a problem his mother had created. The phone rang again, same number. This time something different compelled me to answer. Not hope, not love, a cold, clinical need to hear it, to hear the pathetic, wheedling excuse he would inevitably manufacture, to have this final, definitive piece of evidence that I was making the right choice. I swiped answer and put the phone to my ear. I said nothing. I would give him nothing. "Amelia!" His voice was faint, trembling. It was a sound I'd never heard before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't command. It was raw, undiluted panic. "Amelia, are you there? Please. I'm here." My voice was flat, lifeless, a stark contrast to his shaky, breathy tenor. He let out a ragged, shuddering breath. "Oh, thank God. Amelia, God, I don't even know how to say this." I remained silent. The void on my end of the line was a weapon. Let him squirm. Let him flounder in the emptiness he had created. "The necklace," he began, his words tripping over each other in a desperate rush. "Mom, oh Jesus, Amelia, she found it." I closed my eyes. A cold, utterly satisfied smile touched my lips, a smile that felt like it belonged to someone else. But I said nothing. I let the silence stretch, let him feel the weight of it. "It was in her safe," he rushed on, the words tumbling out in a torrent of nervous energy. She completely forgot she put it there. She was cleaning out her jewelry box this morning, organizing things, and she just found it. Right there. Amelia, she's devastated. She's so sorry. We're both so sorry. It was a terrible, horrible mistake." The apology was worse than the accusation. It was so feeble, so utterly, insultingly inadequate for the nuclear bomb they had dropped on my life, my reputation, my very sense of self. A mistake? Mistakenly accusing your daughter-in-law of being a common thief? Mistakenly manipulating your son into physically assaulting his wife in front of their entire social circle? Mistakenly destroying 5 years of a marriage in a single vicious performance? My continued silence clearly unnerved him. He'd expected tears, yelling, maybe forgiveness. He hadn't prepared for this void. "Amelia, say something, please. Please, we need to fix this. Just come home. We can work through this. I love you. I was just so blind. She was so upset. You have no idea, and I lost my head. You have to understand the pressure she puts on me. You know what she's like." And there it was. The excuse. The pathetic, predictable blame shift. She made him do it. She was upset. His unhealthy, possessive mother was his eternal get-out-of-jail-free card. He was still her little boy, standing in the ruins of the life he had broken, holding a shard of the vase and whining, "But she made me do it." He was completely, tragically oblivious to the fact that the whole house had burned to the ground. The clarity of that moment was blinding, a sun breaking through a lifetime of fog. It was the final missing piece. He wasn't just weak, he was complicit. He was a willing participant in her drama because it was easier than standing up to her. He would never change. He would always choose her, and he would always expect me to clean up the emotional wreckage afterward, to absolve him, to comfort him for the pain he had caused. I found my voice. It was calm, ice cold, and it was entirely, unequivocally, my own. "I understand perfectly, David," I said, each word measured, clear, and dropped into the phone like a stone into a deep well. "I understand that you believed her lie without a single question. I understand that you chose to lay hands on me. I understand that you humiliated me, assaulted me, and abandoned me in public. I understand that you left me lying on the floor and walked away without a backward glance. And I understand that you're only calling me now because you got caught in that lie and you're scared of the consequences." He started to splutter, to interrupt. "That's not... Amelia, please. You have to believe me. I love you." "No, you don't," I said, the truth of it resonating in my very bones, a fundamental and unshakable fact. "You love the idea of me. You love having a wife your mother can bully and belittle, so she doesn't focus all that poison on you. You love having a pawn in your sick little game, a willing participant in the fantasy that you're a good son and a good husband. Well, the pawn is leaving the board, David. The game is over." "What are you saying?" he whispered, his voice small, broken, a child's voice. "I'm saying your mother was right about one thing, David. I was never enough for your family." I took a sharp, clean breath, filling my lungs with the free air of my new life. "But it turns out your family was never enough for me. Don't call this number again. Any further communication can go through my lawyer." I could hear him crying now, shallow, pathetic sobs that evoked not an ounce of sympathy in me. "Amelia, wait." I didn't wait. I ended the call. I placed the phone gently on the table. My hand was perfectly steady. The biggest heartbreak had indeed saved me from a lifetime of regret. The pain in my back was a dull ache, a permanent reminder. But it was overshadowed by a feeling of immense, unshakable power. I had stood in the chaos they created, and I had kept my dignity. I had told my truth, and I was finally free. The silence after David's call was not empty. It was full. It vibrated with the echoes of my own words, with the finality of the click that had severed the last tether. For a long moment, I just sat at Sarah's kitchen table, watching the morning light strengthen, painting stripes across the linoleum. The world hadn't ended. The sky hadn't fallen. I had simply told the truth to the man who had built his life on a foundation of his mother's lies, and the foundation had held. Mine had. The next few weeks were a study in controlled, methodical unraveling. Lorraine, my pit bull of a lawyer, was worth her weight in gold. The restraining order was granted with swift, satisfying efficiency based on the police report and hospital records. David's panicked calls to her office were met with a wall of unflappable professionalism. "All communication will be in writing, Mr. Harrington." I could almost hear his frustration through the wall. The dissolution process was ugly, but it was a clinical ugliness. David, through his own high-priced attorney, initially tried to contest the terms, to fight for assets he felt entitled to. But Lorraine was merciless. She wielded the police report and the photos of my bruises like a scalpel. "We can certainly take this to court and make this a very public discussion about domestic assault," she said in a cool, dry tone during one of their many negotiations. "I'm sure the partners at your firm would find that fascinating reading in the business section." The fight drained out of him after that. He capitulated, agreeing to a more than fair settlement that included my share of the equity in the house I'd helped pay for. It wasn't about the money, it was about principle. It was about him being forced to acknowledge, on paper, what he had done. The physical pain faded, replaced by a profound emotional exhaustion. There were days the grief would ambush me, not for him, but for the dream of him, for the man I'd thought he was. I'd find myself crying in the supermarket aisle, set off by the sight of his favorite brand of coffee. Sarah would just hand me a tissue and steer me towards the ice cream, never offering empty platitudes, just her solid, unwavering presence. One afternoon, a box arrived at Sarah's apartment. It was from the house. My heart hammered against my ribs, a foolish, fearful part of me expecting some cruel final trick from Eleanor. But the return address was from a neutral shipping company. Inside, nestled in a bed of foam peanuts, was the Lalique vase, the one I'd brought to Eleanor on that day. The reason I'd been in her room. There was no note. Its return was a message in itself. "We don't want anything from you." I picked it up, the crystal cool and exquisitely heavy in my hands. I thought of shattering it on the patio, watching the expensive shards glitter in the sun, a symbolic destruction of that entire life. But I didn't. Instead, I placed it on the windowsill in Sarah's living room. It was beautiful. It caught the light and threw tiny rainbows on the walls. It was a reminder that not everything from that time was tainted. I had chosen that vase. I had earned the money to pay for it with my own work. Its beauty belonged to me, not to them. I would not let their poison ruin beautiful things for me. Months bled into a year. I found a small, sun-drenched apartment with a view of a park, not the manicured gardens of the country club. I used part of the settlement to take a sabbatical from my consultancy. The passion for it had been crushed under the weight of Eleanor's dismissals. Your little art projects. I needed to find it again. I started painting. Not for clients, not for a portfolio, for me. Large, messy, vibrant canvases filled with color and raw, unedited emotion. I painted my anger, my grief, my dizzying fear, and my dawning hope. I didn't show them to anyone. They were for me. I heard snippets about them, of course. The world is small. Mutual friends, careful and awkward, would sometimes share news. David had moved back in with Eleanor, temporarily. He was seen around town, they said, but the easy charm was gone. He looked diminished, shadowed. He was forever his mother's little boy now, trapped in her gilded cage, and everyone knew it. The story of the anniversary party had spread, as these things do. The details were fuzzy, but the essential truth was there. He had chosen his mother over his wife, violently and publicly. The respect he'd commanded in his professional circle had curdled into pity and quiet disdain. His punishment was not a court sentence. It was a life sentence with his warden. One crisp autumn day, a year and a half after the incident, as I'd come to call it in therapy, I was walking through the park. The leaves were a blaze of fire, and the air smelled of wood smoke and change. My phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, but I had a feeling. I answered. "Amelia?" It was David's mother. Eleanor's voice, once a weapon of cold precision, was frayed at the edges, thin and reedy. A year ago I would have hung up. Now I felt nothing but a distant curiosity. Eleanor. A pause. I could hear her gathering her dignity, a shawl she was trying to wrap around a crumbling form. I suppose you've heard about David. I don't keep tabs, Eleanor. It was the truth. He's not well. The words were dragged out of her, each one a defeat. He resigned from the firm. He barely leaves the house. She took a shaky breath. He misses you. The audacity was almost impressive. It was the same old script. David was sad, so it was someone else's job to fix it, usually mine. I didn't respond. I just let the silence hang, listening to the rustle of the leaves and her strained breathing. He made a mistake, she pleaded, and the word was so grotesquely inadequate it was almost funny. A terrible mistake. We both did. That business with the necklace, it was a misunderstanding. And there it was. The final, desperate attempt to rewrite history, to sand down the sharp, ugly edges of their actions into a palatable misunderstanding. I felt no anger, only a profound, bottomless pity for both of them. They were forever trapped in their own web, unable to see the strands that bound them, let alone break free. It wasn't a misunderstanding, Eleanor, I said, my voice calm, clear, and utterly final. It was a choice. You chose to lie, he chose to believe you, he chose to put his hands on me. Those were all choices, and I have chosen to live with the consequences of yours. I suggest you learn to live with them too. The line was silent for so long I thought she'd hung up. Then, a soft, broken sound that might have been a sob, the great Eleanor Harrington, brought low not by scandal or poverty, but by the terrifying, empty silence of a son who had finally broken beyond her ability to control or repair. I ended the call. I didn't do it with triumph or malice. I simply ended it. I continued my walk, my hands buried in my pockets. The sun was warm on my face. I thought of my apartment waiting for me. I thought of the half-finished painting on my easel, a stormy sea giving way to a calm golden sunrise. It was a little cliché, but it was my cliché. The biggest heartbreak had not just saved me from a lifetime of regret. It had led me to a life I could never have imagined. A life that was entirely, authentically my own. It was quieter. It was smaller. It was filled with the simple, sturdy love of real friends, the quiet satisfaction of my own company, and the hard-won peace that comes from telling the truth, even when your voice shakes. I had run from the toxic relationship, just as the note had advised. I had run straight into myself, and I was finally enough.